hey, way, ay, oh, 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 hey, ay, ay, oh, way, ay, oh, hey, way, ay, oh, hey, ay, ay, oh. Way, ay, oh, hey, 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 ay, oh, way, ay, oh, hey, way, ay, oh, hey, ay, oh. Way, ay, oh, hey, 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 ay, oh, way, ay, oh, hey, way, ay, oh, hey, ay, oh. Way, ay, oh, hey, 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 ay, oh, way, ay, oh, hey, way, ay, oh, hey, ay, oh.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I welcome you to this interview and to this event of balancing sacred masculine and sacred feminine within ourselves, within our world. And let me introduce you, Pat. Pat McCabe, Woman Stands Shining, is a holy earth surface walker, life bringer, life bearer, dedicated to upholding the deep honor of being human being in service to the holy hoop of life. Her work through song, story, visioning, ceremony, and inquiry on different parts of the earth is a reconciling, reframing, and a remembering to the master plan, thriving life. Fundamental to this calling is a remembering ourselves to the truth of sacred feminine and sacred masculine and their functional polarity. She is also called upon to work with this question: if all times are accessible at the same time, what is possible? This inquiry is leading to global and ancestral ceremonies dedicated to the realignment of our past, changing our trajectory into the future. So I'm so happy to welcome you here, Pat, and to be talking with you today. And to start the interview, could you just share a little bit about your perspective on sacred masculine and sacred feminine in our modern world, and how they interplay for us in this modern world that we have, and what can we learn?
Well, thank you so much, Jocelyn. I'm really, really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful for our topic today. I think it is the topic of the day. And I guess part of the reason I say that is because, I come from the Dene people, the Dene by blood, and by practice. I was adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life. So I kind of draw from those ancient cultures as I consider this question, and as I consider our work in the modern world around this question. And so from what I was told by my elders is that maybe some of you have heard that that we talk about being and having passed through different worlds already. And so one of my elders said that we've just recently passed from one world into the next, so it doesn't necessarily mean that we've had any kind of cataclysmic event before we have to change worlds. It can be an energetic shift as well. But the previous world was, we kind of hit the reset button for humanity on. And that came with the Great Flood, which many cultures talk about, and my culture does as well. And what I was told is that the reason that that happened was because men and women believed that they could live without each other. And so this is a very long-standing piece of work for humanity. And sometimes I joke, I mean, it's kind of a dark humor, but I say, you know, I feel like if we have to lose another world, I would at least like us to move on to a new topic, but I think we're still in that topic. So this is, like I say, a long-standing piece of healing that we are in need of. And what I usually start out by talking about is I say that, you know, if whenever we bring up masculine and feminine, it tends to be pretty threatening for either one gender or the other. Mm-hmm. And I attribute that to a very deep wounding that we've been indoctrinated, as part of our indoctrination is deeply wounding, and that indoctrination is into hierarchy. And so from the time, you know, if we've been affected by, I guess we'll call it Western world, or we could call it modern world education systems, we've been deeply indoctrinated into hierarchy, into, you know, first place, second place, third place. You know, you get an A plus, A minus, B, and so you're in there like fighting for that, you know, a little bit of better GPA. All of those kinds of things have really had a deep effect on us, and because we've been indoctrinated in those ways from the time we're little, it's very, very deeply ingrained. And so then later in life, the way it plays out is through power. And so, you know, what we're told is that, you know, if we have a higher GPA, we'll get into a better college. And then if we get into a better college, we'll get a better job. And so that's very tied to our survival, right? You know, what kind of job we have. And so, you know, we've had a lot of talk about the glass ceiling and et cetera, that women can only progress so far. And so that not only affects self-esteem, it actually affects our survival, right? So food, clothing, and shelter is on the line with this kind of power structure, this hierarchical power structure. And so as soon as we begin to talk about this question of masculine and feminine in modern world, we bump up against this power struggle. And so I want to address that right away, because some of what I have to say, I want us to keep in mind that, you know, is our response to what I'm saying really, really threatening, or is it only threatening if we insist on living our lives entirely through this power play kind of system that we're in? So maybe I'll start talking about masculine and feminine so that we can begin to see how that comes into play. So one thing that I've been saying is that right for some time now we have lived in a power over paradigm. And in a power over paradigm, might makes right. And so that means whoever is the strongest. So power over meaning one thing, in order to have success, I'll say, quote, success, one thing has to have power over another. That's the way to have success. So you're always aiming to be the one who has more power over other people. And ideally, you end up being the one who's at the top and has the most power, right? That's sort of the goal. And because if you have that, you have more opportunity, you have more resources, and you have more control. Right. And so in the power over paradigm, if might makes right, where literally it can come down to brute strength, men are going to dominate in that structure. And that is, in fact, the case that we've seen for millennia. I would say at this point that men have been holding those higher places, I guess you could say, in this power structure, and so this is how most of us look at this question of masculine and feminine is from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that has been proposed to me is that we don't have to live in that paradigm, that paradigm is a choice. And that in fact, many cultures throughout the world have known how to live in other paradigms. And so this question of masculine and feminine functionality, I call it functional polarity, really has a lot to do with what paradigm we're in. And so I'll say something that my spirit guides said to me recently, and that is that, you think you know what masculine is, but you really don't. And you think you know what feminine is, but you really don't. All you really know is how the masculine behaves in this power over paradigm. All you really know is how the feminine behaves when it is forced into power over paradigm. But in fact, these two medicines, these two energies behave very, very differently when you plug them into other paradigms. And so that's what I'm very curious about. And I know something about that from my own experience coming out of very high-powered academics at one point in my life. Really kind of took a great running leap at making my mark on the world and climbing into the highest position I could be in and trying to break through that glass ceiling and going to have a powerful, abundant, I guess we could say, or wealthy career kind of a thing that I was into for, that's how I started out in school. And then some things came along that changed that trajectory for me. So that's where I can speak from, is this big shift that happened that I would call moving out of the power over paradigm and really looking at how Indigenous culture holds masculine and how Indigenous culture holds feminine, which I would say is more in a circle rather than a pyramid. And so it's been a process for me to climb down out of the pyramid and to either create my own circle if necessary, or to join other circles, and to try to feel out what does it mean to be an embodied feminine being outside of that paradigm. And so this has been a big part of my inquiry. So that's what I feel like, as you asked the question, where are we at in modern world, maybe with this question, that's kind of how I would frame it at this point, is I think as long as we keep trying to look at what is masculine and what is feminine, when not realizing the context, not realizing the surroundings, our options are for coming together into right relations are very, very limited. Because I think in that paradigm, what we end up doing is we end up saying, well, are you proposing queens instead of kings?
Right.
Should we have queen rulers now? Should the women have their turn to be on top?
Right.
And the answer for me is that no, because the truth is, and we can see it in a lot of other areas outside of the masculine and feminine dynamic, the power over paradigm is not aligned with the plan for this Mother Earth. Because the plan for this Mother Earth is thriving life. And in a power over paradigm, we are not moving towards thriving life. And so this journey of the masculine and feminine needs to really reconsider its context. And so I guess I'll stop there for a moment and say that's how I would frame what's going on in modern times around this question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pat. And I think it's, I resonate so strongly, and I think the people listening will too, with that idea of, we need to get to an entirely new paradigm, an entirely new perspective, an entirely new way of understanding things. Or maybe it's the old way, right? Maybe it's the maybe it's the way that we knew long, long ago and we've forgotten. So it's kind of about, well, I've had this come up for me a lot lately around unlearning, unlearning all of these mistaken beliefs and mistaken perceptions that were taught since childhood, in this mainstream society. But it's also about remembering where we came from and remembering, the ancient ways and the ways that we know deep in our heart we used to understand long, long, long ago, and getting back to that.
Yes. My grandfather says, it's so old, it's new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels that way. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had mentioned before that the sacred masculine is so obscured today. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, so, and this is a story that I hear a lot from many different women. In my early years, certainly when I was a young pre-adolescent girl, and even maybe early adolescent, I really aligned with boys and the masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say I was a tomboy. And I, as I look back on it now, I realize that I had eyes in my head. I was looking around and I was seeing that, the people who seemed to have the most freedom, the most resources, the most permission, to do what they felt like doing, to do what they felt led to do, were the boys and the masculine. And so I decided early on that I was going to align with that. And that stayed true for me up until, late 20s, I would say. And so women were to be, they were suspect to me. Sorry, my light keeps changing because I'm in New Mexico and we have some very wild weather going on. So I'm trying to work with it here. But anyway, to go back to this. And so that's one thing I want to say, is that I really aligned with the masculine. And then, and women were suspect to me, because it seemed, it was pretty classic. I felt like they were competitors to me. And so I wasn't very interested in engaging with them. But somewhere around my mid-30s, that shifted. I came into an inquiry where I was, where I re-engaged with the spiritual path, and I had abandoned all spirituality from like age 14 to about 29, and that's another whole story. But when I came to a very, very hard place, the classic rock in a hard place, I called out for something, and something came to meet me, and so I began to engage on the spiritual path again. And I realized that I couldn't go back to the same masculine deity. And so I really called out to know what would this feminine aspect of divinity be like. And so that was when things began to shift. And I began to meet with, to do ceremony in which the women were put on one place and the men were put in another place. And so that meant that I had to engage with the women. And so a sisterhood kind of began to develop for me for the first time. So all that is to say that I've been very deeply engaged for a long time around the feminine and around sisterhood and around trying to have social justice in terms of being born in this woman's body and noticing the inequalities in the world. So this is very recent now, where suddenly I've really begun to consider, how did the masculine end up where they ended up? How did they end up in these positions of power? What is that? On the one hand, it looks like it's all it's all benefit from feminine perspective. You know, they have all the advantages. And yet, you know, as I have been traveling on this spiritual road, what I'm witnessing is that there's a lot of men really suffering out there. And there's a lot of men committing suicide out there. And so here they are. Well, one, there's also a huge spectrum of I guess we could say states of wealth, power, privilege within the spectrum of men's nation. So race comes into play there as well. So not all the men are on top and doing well, but some are really having as much difficulty as women are. They have a glass ceiling as well. So I began to open my eyes to the subtleties of what was going on with men's nation. And so I guess what I see at this point is that, so another thing about this power over paradigm is that it's a rigged system. Just straight up, it's rigged. If we look at the structure of it being a pyramid, all the effort, all the cream, all the profit, all the benefits are constantly flowing to the top. Mm-hmm. And so the farther down you are on that pyramid, the harder you have to work just to keep your place. And keeping your place in that lower part of the pyramid is a pretty deep struggle. And there's a lot of fear around it too, because if you lose your place, that means you're going to drop even further down the pyramid, and then your circumstances increase in difficulty, and your opportunities for being able to climb up a little higher get fewer and far between. So it's a violent system. And so if we say that women are primarily kept out of the pyramid altogether, they have been historically for some time, or they were finally let in, but their ability to advance is very limited, then we could say that structure is primarily a masculine structure. And so in that place, you know, I feel like the men are well, some of the consequences for being in that structure is extreme isolation, because the competition is so fierce. Also, there still prevails from ancient culture, I would say, this idea that the man is supposed to be able to provide, certainly for himself, but also potentially for a woman, a life bringer, who might then bring life, and then there's children involved. And so there's still that overlay for the men, that's what they're supposed to be able to do, and yet they're plugged into a system that is extremely difficult to have that kind of success in. And so the pressure on the men is extreme right now, and I think we're beginning to really witness the consequences of that. But I know you're going to want to ask this question, so I might just hop ahead to it. But what really happened for me with the masculine came with a certain event. So in 2014 and 2015, I began to have visions about certain events that took place in Europe. And those events were the so-called witch hunts. And the reason that I started having these visions was because I have been working on my own, self-employed for a long time, but I chose to take a job in a nonprofit. And I won't go into all the details about it, but basically I got to experience this hierarchy piece where I had a very young man who was in his early 30s, really feeling like he had the authority and the moral ground, I guess we could even say, to really be very aggressive with me, rude and disrespectful. And it really rocked me because he was in a position of power. And so it was, and nobody seemed to be able to know what to do about it, even though I brought it to people's attention. There was no action that could be taken, seemingly. I mean, I could think of plenty of actions that could have been taken, but nobody around me, everybody around me seemed to be in paralysis. And so all the usual avenues of going to a board, going through mediation, etc., none of it seemed to be able to touch this. And for some reason, being in that situation brought me to begin to have visions, very vivid, very intense visions of the witch trials. And I can tell you, I was really, really surprised that would happen that way. But as time went on, those visions began to deepen and deepen and deepen. So I was witnessing the trials and feeling that frustration of knowing that I was being brought into a court, and all of these, and it was ran entirely by men, and in this nonprofit, the board that they had chosen was almost entirely men. So it was very similar. And but anyway, I was brought into this trial. It was all men. And they were all talking all this beautiful talk about justice. They had all the language for it. They were very articulate, and they were great orators. And yet I knew, as I stood there bound with my hands behind my back, that there was not a chance in the world of me receiving justice. And so I got to really feel the fear, yes, because I knew what was going to happen when I was found guilty, but also the complete disdain for these men. And I had gone to a healer a couple years before, and they had said to me, you hold fear and disdain of men. And if you want to change your relationships with men, you're going to need to heal that. And at the time, I really couldn't understand it very well. But when I started having those visions, then I understood. I understood that was absolutely where that was coming from.
Yeah.
And so I also experienced the torture. I also experienced the breaking down of relationship with my sisters. I also experienced my mistrust of judgment. My mistrust of justice. I experienced fear of being in sisterhood with others, because what I saw was that a woman could be tortured just for knowing me, just for caring about me, just for being associated with me. And so a lot of the behaviors of women in modern times began to make a lot of sense to me. Why we fear sisterhood. It wasn't only just the competition and etc. It was also a protection. We wanted to protect each other by not getting close. So that was quite an experience. But the surprising part for me was that but when I was first seeing these things, my rage against the masculine and men just went out the roof. And I realized that actually I had been born enraged, this lifetime. I had been so immersed in rage that I didn't even know I had it, just for being born in this female body. And, but also shame. You know, I have worked with women who really, oh, sorry, I'm trying to find the light now, who really have experienced terrible things at the hands of men, rape, for instance, or other abuse. And they carried the shame. So it was like they carried the shame that the abuser, I would say, maybe should have carried, right? And so I had heard about that phenomenon, but I had never experienced it myself, or I wasn't aware of it. But with these events, I became very aware of the shame that I was carrying. Huge shame. And then that would fuel the rage again. So it was just like this cycle going round and round between rage, shame, and despair. And so while I was going through this, there was like a chorus of spirits that were singing to me while all this was happening. And I finally I'd been aware of them, but I hadn't really listened to what they were saying. And finally, I kind of tuned in. I'm like, well, what are they saying? Why are they constantly saying the same thing over and over again as I'm watching all of this unfold? And what they were saying to me is, it will never serve you or life or light or love for you to see these events, witness these events, and interpret them as being events that are about men versus women. Mm-hmm. And that was not what I wanted to hear. That was really not what I wanted to hear. And so it just fanned the flames of my rage even higher. And I remember saying to these spirit helpers, "Are you kidding me? Look at this. Look, who is the judge? Who is the jury? Who are the torturers? They're all men. You can't tell me this isn't about men and women." Mm-hmm. And so I kind of went around in that heightened rage for a bit. But I've had enough experience with these spirit helpers to where I could finally say to myself, hey, you know what? These guys never lie to you. They never lie to you. They're trying to show you something. They want to inform you about something. So you need to stop and just consider what they're saying and take another look. And so I tried to do that, and it was very difficult. And I got to really feel, witness, and acknowledge how invested I was in this orientation of fear, disdain, and rage against men. I was very deeply invested in it. And that was something else I didn't know. So it took a lot of work to kind of pry myself out of that mindset and to be able to try to take a look. And the first place that I could begin to see what they were saying was I began to see that there were men who were witnessing these events who were horrified. They were desperate to save the women. Of course they were. They were desperate to save their wives, their sisters, their daughters, their aunts, even their grandmothers. I mean, of course they were desperate to save these women from this injustice and from this extreme violence. It's hard to emphasize deeply enough how extreme this violence was. It was intended to sear our souls such that we could never forget it. And I would definitely say we have not forgotten it. And because we still carry that, it's playing out in modern times right now. But we'll get to that maybe in a little bit. I want to continue on about this, thinking about the masculine. And so that was the first opening for me, was to realize that there were many men who were desperate to protect these women, and they weren't able to because of the power structure at the time. And then I also got to notice that there were many women working behind the scenes orchestrating terrible things for their sisters. Granted, they were in a pretty tough situation, and sometimes they did those things to be able to save a loved one. And sometimes they did those things uh, for their own personal gain, but but those things did happen. And so I began to, like, a crack opened inside of me where I could begin to consider this from another place other than an us versus them. I began to see it wasn't completely black and white. And so what I began to notice about the masculine was I thought about it and I thought, wow, in indigenous culture, we know what happens to our men when they are not able to protect the women and children and elders. It changes them. It deeply changes them. And so, there's probably a broad spectrum of ways that we could describe that change, but two ways that seem very prevalent is they either go on to become perpetrators of violence and injustice themselves, or they withdraw from the world and community almost entirely, and they become powerless to take action. So that might mean that they're not working, and they're not helping with physically with activities. And I know in African American culture, they're really exploring that as well for what happened to the men. And so when we look at the incredible atrocities of what took place during the slave trade throughout the world, but I've looked at it a little bit more here in the United States, and what took place on the plantations and et cetera here in the United States with the men, it's devastating to them. And it changes the men generation to generation. So that was something that I had never really considered before. Now, before these visions, I had a long series of visioning that was also devastating, which was witnessing when the U.S. military rode down on the Dene people, my people, in the attempted genocide that took place here in the United States. And one of the things that I remember thinking about those soldiers as I watched them, and I could see their eyes in the vision as they were riding down and murdering my family around me, was there was this bizarre detachment. And I remember thinking to myself, they are like insects, like they're not even human. There's no passion. I called it passionless destruction. They didn't know us. They didn't know why they were doing what they were doing. They were just doing this horrible thing. And that was one of the hardest parts about those visions, was this detachment that these soldiers had. Well, when I came around to have these visions of the witch hunts, what I realized is that those soldiers were the sons and grandsons. It's going to make me cry. Of those men who had to witness their women be destroyed during the witch hunts. So it's no wonder. It's no wonder they were vacant. It's no wonder that they could detach from this atrocity. And so that recognition changed everything for me around my orientation towards the masculine. Suddenly, compassion just flooded into me for the men. And it's still with me now. And and so, as I look at the men in modern world today, and I think about they're feeling no other place to be or to go other than to be, they're kind of just born and plugged into this system of continued violence. I think, I just see that they don't feel like there's anything else for themselves. And so while I wish and I think maybe people everywhere have this idea, we wish that they would do something else with this power that we might perceive that they have. You know, why don't they share that wealth? Why don't they use that power to create justice? Why don't they, you know, all of those things? I do think that that could be possible, but I also have a lot of compassion for why that might not occur to them. Just given the history of the lineage moving up to this time, you know, and so now I'm thinking about the men, and what I'm saying to them is, and again, this goes back to looking at this from indigenous culture. In indigenous culture, sacred masculine, two of the primary characteristics of sacred masculine is that they are protectors. They are here to protect the life. They're here to protect the women, the children, and the elders, so that life will continue on. And they can be called upon at any moment to make that ultimate sacrifice, as they say, to lay down their life for us. And so they have been really prevented from really feeling that part of themselves because of this system. You know, the goal is not to have self-sacrifice. The goal is to protect the individual and their ability to have everything they need so that they don't have to worry about their own personal survival. That's what this pyramid capitalist system rewards and encourages. It doesn't reward and encourage community. It doesn't reward and encourage sharing. And so the men I believe, have this inherent, it's biologically wired into them, need to be a protector, and yet most of their actions, if only in the abstract, are actually still doing the opposite, still creating great destruction, and still making it impossible for many people to have just enough to get by. And so that's psychically a very difficult place for the men to be. And then there's the provider part, you know, same thing. So if they're going to be protectors and providers, this system doesn't really allow for that. So one of the things I've been saying to the men is, hey, I have climbed down out of that pyramid, and as I sit here in this circle, way down here below the heights of that pyramid, what I'm noticing is that I need you. I need you here with me, and I need you to be whole. I need you to be that warrior, that protector, and I need you to be that provider, not in a way where I am going to take advantage of you and make you sorry and sad that you ever provided for me, which is another phenomenon in modern culture with modern divorce and etc. But as a community, as an elder woman in community who is attending to the whole community, I need you. And so I don't want to see you get broken in that horrible system. And I believe it's going to break you, because you're not meant to win in there. You're never going to win in there. And so I'm calling out to you, and I'm saying to you, come down from there, and come and sit with me here. Because I think there's a beauty for you, and I think that there's something else for you, but we're going to have to co-create it together. And so this is what really arises for me with Men's Nation. So what an incredible transformation for me to really recognize that the men are not my enemy. In order for me to function at my peak, which I think is really, this Mother Earth at this time is really calling for, I'm going to need to be working with the men. So there's a very long answer. um, but it's
Yeah,
really important.
that's really important. I know it was about a year ago that you shared that with our group, and I have never seen men in the same way since then, definitely, or or women either, to tell you the truth, since you originally shared that with me. That just knowing, because I've felt a lot of blame too. I've felt that anger and that kind of rage at, I was in corporate for more than 15 years, and I saw how it worked. I saw how the game was played, and I did my best, and I got pretty far, but it definitely made me angry. And so I just really identified so much with what you said. And just to think about both men and women, the woundings that we carry with us from past lifetimes into this lifetime, and bringing awareness to that some of what we feel goes back further than, just this life and maybe our childhood in this lifetime. And to have that understanding, I think just really helps to be more open to the struggles that everybody's going through. But, in this case, particularly to see the challenges that men are facing in this modern mainstream society, it's really, really eye-opening and a huge paradigm shift. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yes. It's definitely a paradigm shift. And it really, a big question for me is, how do we voluntarily give up the illusion of power? So to say to the men, come down out of the pyramid, come and sit with me here, it's got to feel like huge, huge risk and huge, huge loss. And I would say that the truth is that really isn't actual power. It's the illusion of power. Because if it were actually power, humanity would be thriving. Humanity, all the children would be fed and taken care of. All the elders would be feeling needed and joyful. Like, that's the measure of power and success for every species, and ours is no exception. And so that's a big question that I want to begin to explore: is what do we need in the way of support in order to give up these illusions of power? And that's a big question for the men right now. I'm moving over here.
And yeah, so I wanted, there's one thing that I did want to ask you too, as related to the environment and how we are destroying our planet, at this time. When you were talking earlier about the pyramid, and the idea that to be successful is to have power and to have control over. And that is quite clearly what we're doing to the natural world, to our earth. And so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, and how does that relate to the feminine, and what can we do, to shift that paradigm as well? What ideas do you have?
Well,
big question.
Another big question. Right. And so, yes, I would agree that this power over requires us to disengage from our feeling center. And so we watch. I mean, we've been saying in modern world culture that the men have lost touch with their feelings, and I would say that's a requirement of participating in the power over paradigm. And so they've lost their feeling for family, so they have to, in order to be able to put in the 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. You have to not notice how your body is feeling. You have to not notice what kind of emotional needs you might have, because none of those are being met in those hours usually. And so gradually you're numbing yourself to a great number of things, but I would call it, shutting off your connection to your heart center. And so with that, men might rarely see their children. They might rarely see their mate. And the same goes for the working woman. That's happening there too. Anybody who plugs into that system.
Yeah.
I'm watching my son right now. He just took on a job where he's working 60 hours a week, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. But I'm just kind of observing what he has to do to be able to do that. Yeah. And so when that happens, we're also if we can disengage from our feeling center around our own children, around our companion, around our, we definitely could do that around our mothers and fathers who are aging. That's just like more than we know how to take on when we're disconnected that way. And so, the easiest thing to do is, and there are lots of reasons why people need to do this. So I don't mean to belittle it entirely, but, why our elders are put into homes. Everything has to work around a person trying to climb up this pyramid. And so we definitely then can easily disengage from the natural world. Our feeling center for the natural world is even more limited than with those closest to us. Mm-hmm. And so, as long as we keep detaching from the natural world, we can make decisions that deeply, deeply affect the natural world and not have any feeling around it. So we're not actually suffering yet around those decisions. We will, we're fixing to, but it hasn't come quite yet. I mean, it has in some parts of the world for sure. I should say, I guess I'm sort of talking, as I live here in the United States, and my spirit guides have said to me, by the time first world, as we like to call them, first world nations begin to feel the consequences of our actions, it's going to be way, way down the road. That scale will have tipped very, very far. But there are many nations who are feeling it acutely right now. So I don't want to pretend that that's not happening. It is happening. And for sure, there are animal nations that are suffering in the extreme. As I flip through my Facebook page, every now and then we'll get a glimpse of what's taking place in the oceans, the disease that are showing up in marine life, and in other animal kingdoms as well. And so that's a part of the consequence of remaining plugged into this system, this particular paradigm, because it'll shut down our feeling system, our feeling center. What I feel, I've had a pretty big shift recently, and it's not a comfortable one, not at all. I have a sense. I mean, I don't just have a sense. I have a knowing that we could turn all this around. But lately, I've been feeling like I don't think we're going to, because it really takes a deep internal shift. If that's what it's going to take. We are going to have to reconnect to our feeling center, just as a very beginning, basic place. And what I'm witnessing is, and this is globally, people doing everything they possibly can not to connect with that feeling center, which is why the addiction rates are just, rampant. Mm-hmm. Addiction, I like Gabor Mate. He says, every addiction is addiction to painkillers. Mm. And I would agree with that statement. Yeah. And so rather than do that messy and highly risky, because if you're going to go in and deal with your feeling center, you're going to be out of commission probably for a bit, would be my guess at this point. there's a lot of reckoning that needs to happen. And with all the numbing that most of us have done, and just that's inherent in the system in which dominates this planet at this time, there's a lot of pain to be reckoned with. And I know from my own experience that takes enormous courage to go ahead and go in there and allow all the feelings that go along with what's taking place in modern world. And so I know what it takes for me to have the courage to allow that level of grief to arise and to work it out, to cry it out, to convulse everything that goes with it, to vomit even, that's how deep it goes. And every time it comes up, my first instinct is to run and find some way to not do that. I have to consciously sort of grab myself by the hand and go sit down at my altar and say, we're going to do this. Because if we don't, and I'm talking to myself, right? We're going to do something harmful in this world. And my commitment is to try not to do anything more harmful in this world. So I just know what that process is for myself. And I feel like I have great practice at it. And I have huge support for it. And I have ceremony that helps me go through it. To be honest, I don't know how a person would do it without a spiritual basis. And many people really feel pretty adamant that they don't need a spiritual basis in this modern world. Science kind of covers all the bases for them. And academics, rational knowledge covers all the bases for them. So I'm feeling a little like, I'm not sure we're going to pull the rabbit out of the hat right now when I really look at what it's going to take for us to address and make the shift that it is absolutely possible for us to make this shift. But will we do it? I'm not sure. So I don't want to leave that just laying there like that. That's a pretty difficult scenario. So what I will say is, I had to go through my grief and go outside and vomit over that too, or just allowing that possibility, But what has come by allowing that possibility is a very, very long range view of things. My time expanse just expanded so huge that at first it felt really like it was almost crushing. Because I felt like the women in my family lived to be 100 and more, and so I felt like, yeah, man, I'm going to live a long life, 100 years. Well, in that time frame, 100 years doesn't feel like very much. And so I began to question, well, what does my life mean then if I'm like a drop in the bucket, so to speak? And so I had to sit with that for a little bit. But what has come back around to me is that it matters very deeply what I do, what I invest this life gift in is crucial to everything. And so I guess the way that I look at it now is whether we manage to pull the rabbit out of the hat right now or not, it still matters what I do and how I do it and the progress that I make. Because, and here I get to call upon Indigenous perspective. My clan grandfather says, we're in the sixth world now. Some of the first worlds didn't even have a physicality to them; they were energetic. But so this is the long range plan, right? So we are in 6 worlds as of now. He says we are to go through 12 worlds. So I'm like, wow, okay, now that's a big expanse of time. And so I've been saying to myself, all right, so what given that scenario, what makes sense for me? And I don't feel like I have the complete answer to that, but the shift in my heart has given me a kind of exuberance I haven't felt for a couple of years in this very extreme circumstance we find ourselves in on the planet. And I just feel a lot of exuberance knowing that, you know, one of the things that I know that I am committed to is making my relationship with this earth again. That is what I am made to do as a being on this earth. And I need to explore that as deeply as I possibly can. The other thing that I can do is try to understand, how do I uphold the honor of my kind, my species? What are the actions that are honorable in such a way that they stand the test of time, that they can stand the test of millennia? And I believe that indigenous culture has a lot to tell us about what kind of actions those are. To express gratitude with joy. The holy people have said to me recently, joy is always appropriate, no matter what's going on. Don't ever feel bad about feeling joy. Go for it. Have it. And so I feel like what I witness in indigenous culture is we used to spend a lot of time just rejoicing and expressing awe and gratitude about this incredible creation we were placed in. And so that, I know, is an action that I will never have to regret or feel bad about. Mm-hmm. So everything that I do can be done in that way. I want to say a couple words about, you know, you mentioned in my bio this idea that all times are happening at the same time. So if all times are happening at the same time, what is possible? That's what the question the spirits proposed to me. So if all times are happening at the same time, then it doesn't really matter if we're talking, you know, if we say that the earth has been here 5 billion years and we're only halfway through the project. You know, when I started getting really crushed by that scenario, the spirit said to me, we want you to know that time, you experience time in a certain way while you're in your human suit. While you're in your human body, it is experienced in a certain way. And so when you look at expanses of time like we're talking about, yeah, it's pretty daunting. But trust us when we tell you time is not what you think it is. Mm. It only has to be that way or feel that way while you're embodied walking around on the earth in the physical plane. And so I think then this question that they asked me means that it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about 1 second or 5 billion years if all times are happening at the same time. And so, you know, this brings us back to some of our Eastern philosophy, which says all the power is right now because it's always right now. It's always right now. And so that's what I have to attend to. And how can I be in this moment with the greatest honor, the greatest love, the greatest respect for this incredible creation that I'm in? How do I do that? Now and now and now and now. So this has kind of become my new way of moving. Now, I will also say that what has been said to me recently has been reaffirmed. I've been saying it for a while, but a lot of things I've been saying for a while are suddenly dropping a level deeper into my bones and body. But one of the things I've been saying is that this Mother Earth is the heart of it all. It matters what happens to her, not just to humanity, of course, and not even just to the flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-leggeds, which we so often don't take into account. But it matters to the rest of our, I guess, to the galactic world. It matters what happens to this earth. There's much way far out there that is very concerned with what takes place here, and so how we move with her matters at any given time, because our solar system is also very, very old relative to a human lifespan. And yet I I believe now that the ancient humanity has known how precious this place is that we're in. And so our recognition of that, our relationship with her, but also recognizing that we are her, becomes paramount in this life. I was working with a beautiful Lakota elder man, Tiokasin Ghost Horse, and he was talking about how, you know, we are the minerals, we are the animals. I mean, our body is literally made up of the animals that have gone before us, the plants that have gone before us. And so we carry that continuum and we carry that consciousness. So in a way, we're carrying all times as we walk around right now. There's one other piece that I wanted to say. See if I can come up with it here about that. So I guess I want to have my contribution for this life be part of this continuum that has been held not only on Earth but also in the stars, in recognition of the preciousness of this place. And so I may get to come back around for another life, or we may have to go through a cataclysmic event in which not all of us get to continue on. My sense is that humanity will continue on in some form, and we may have to start at the beginning again, which we have done before. And in this life, I would say our downfall has been not understanding what's under our feet, not understanding the preciousness of this earth and the level of respect that we have to have for her. It's very basic, but we let our intellect carry us on journeys so far away from that we've forgotten that. So my work, you know, so ultimately what happened with the witch hunts visions was that I was told that there was a way to, quote, to go back in time, which is probably not the truth, but that's how I have to look at it as a human being in a body. Go back in time and notice that we took a very harmful turn as a species at that moment when we began to destroy the feminine, destroy women. Many men were also destroyed, but also that way of the feminine. So that way of allowing, that way of all the children are fed and everybody wins. When we took a big step away from that, they called it an archetypal wounding of humanity. And so they said, we need to go back and address that, recognize what happened there, recognize I guess you could say the wrongness of it relative to thriving life, not so much, you're bad. It's just relative to thriving life. That was not the right direction to take. And they told me there was something we could do to realign that. And we did that. Now they're telling me, let's look at another archetypal wounding of humanity. Let's look at another wrong fork in the road that we took. And they're calling out Western science onto the carpet. And they're saying, you know, something funny happened there when you guys turned your whole sense of reality over to the scientific method. You abandoned some very critical pieces of yourself, of your makeup, of the gifts you were given to navigate this Mother Earth in a respectful way. And that has to be addressed. So that's another story, but that's another area that they're asking to look at. So, I had to stop asking myself, well, what's the point in doing all this if we're not going to turn our ship around in time? And now that question has become completely irrelevant. In a way, it's sort of none of my business. That's up to Creator. That's up to this Mother Earth. And it's also up to us as a collective. And I do what I can on that level too. But more, I want to set the groundwork for either the future of all of us as we pull a rabbit out of the hat, or set the groundwork in a good way for whatever our next incarnation might come to be. But, like so many animals that get swept away in tsunamis or suffer in an earthquake, we are part of a continuum. In modern world, we hold our individual lifespan as being so paramount, but I think I feel like I've stepped into this other place where I can look at it like maybe the herd of deer that, 12 of the herd get lost or suffer and die in some way. And the herd notices that, of course, and the herd grieves for it, but they also know that they're moving on. And so I feel like that's sort of a way that is coming over me right now. And I'm not sure that's where I have to stay, but as we have this interview at this moment, that's kind of what's arising for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I will say that the audience that is listening here and the Sacred Planet community are a group of people all around the world who are so courageous and who are so willing to, to feel and to get out of their comfort zone and take steps to do whatever's in their power to bring about a brighter future. And I just, I walk in faith every day that we are creating a critical mass of people who are going to, take decisive action and make a huge difference for the future of our planet. So I just wanted to share that because I know so many people listening right now care so deeply about this, the environment in particular, and also about this larger topic of sacred masculine, sacred feminine. So thank you so much, Pat, for sharing all of your insights and your wisdom. And I would love to keep talking. We are getting near the end of the time that I have available, but
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you would you like to share about any upcoming events or upcoming ways for people to connect with you or work with you more, who have felt a connection with you during this interview?
Yes. I wanted to tell people about two upcoming events. One is at the Ghost Ranch here in New Mexico, which is just a glorious spot on the earth. My goodness. I love going to Ghost Ranch. And I'm going to be teaching or facilitating or exploring, maybe is the best way to describe it, around sacred activism with the fabulous Mona Haydar, who's a young activist who has been doing a lot of work around in the Muslim community here at this very contentious time in the U.S. for the Muslim community, and is in particular about sort of making that place and the right for women to wear the hijab here in this country. So she started a movement called Ask a Muslim in Cambridge, in which she and her husband gave out free coffee and donuts to people and just said, you can ask me anything you want about my Muslim faith, to try to bridge that gap and help people understand, have an opportunity to really understand by talking to somebody of that faith. So she's been on national television. She's been in national magazines for her work that way. And so she's the convener of this sacred activism at Ghost Ranch. And that's going to be July 30th to August 5th. So that's coming up very soon. And I guess we'll have a link to that. And then I also wanted to let people know about a journey that's coming up with the Pachamama Alliance. And it's a masculine, feminine focused journey, because the first part of the journey will be conducted and led by Archana Shwala, And this is also in New Mexico. And he has an amazing spiritual center that he's developed over a number of years. He's from Peru, but like me, he was also adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life, so we share that in common. And he's going to start out the journey, and then I'll join the folks down at his retreat, which is down the road from me. And then we're all going to come up to where I live in Taos, and he'll come up and join us up here, and then I'll finish us out up here. So we're going to be looking at different ways of relating to earth and in ceremony from the masculine and feminine. So it's a great opportunity. And again, that's August 24th to September 1st. And that's through the Pachamama Alliance.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I will be attending that. I just can't wait to be there with you and Archon and the group that comes together. I think it's going to be so amazing and beautiful in so many ways. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Thank you for this series, and thank you for all of your good work.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there anything else, any last words you want to share with us? Any last words of wisdom before we end the interview?
So what you were saying about the listeners and all of their connection to feeling, all of their light work for this Mother Earth, I hope that some of the explorations that I'm in the middle of right now aren't discouraging in any way to anybody who's listening. I certainly don't feel discouraged by it. I just feel like I was asked to open up my vista very, very large so that I could understand and stay really impassioned no matter how it might look. And things are probably going to end up looking pretty funny in the days to come, at least for a while. And I still think we're headed that way for a bit here. But just to know how important holding that space and standing up for our kind, the five-fingered ones, the human beings that are integral part of this earth creation, and how beloved we are to the star beings, as well as this Mother Earth, and as well as all of our relatives here. It's so beautiful. It's so powerful, so important, and it's always going to be right. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. All right, well, it's been really wonderful talking with you today, Pat, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day. I hope your weather calms down there.
Yeah, it might. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Blessings to you.
And to you.